Starting.
Hi, and welcome to Next Chapter Raise. I'm Diana Dorothy. Well, a new report by the Financial Alliance for Women is out, exploring how fintechs have been approaching and serving the multi-trillion-dollar women's market. And joining me now to talk about the survey is one of the authors, Yosha Gupta, founder of MeMeraki and independent financial inclusion consultant. Yosha, will come to you in a moment, but a little bit about your background. Yosha has spent 15 years in the fintech sector. She's worked all across Asia as a financial inclusion consultant with CGAP and IFC World Bank Group. And more recently, she's worked on the recent research commissioned by the Alliance about fintechs and the female economy as a senior advisor with Finstep Asia. Yosha, so great to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. It's a topic very close to my heart, so I'm excited to chat more about it.
There is so much meat in this report. We're going to cover the highlights. First up, how did you come to be involved with it?
How did I come to be involved? Yeah, so as you mentioned, I mean, I've been working, in fintech for the last 15 years, and especially in my work with the World Bank Group, with IFC and CGAP, I focused a lot on gender, and specifically on driving financial inclusion for gender-focused initiatives. I mean, IFC has a very interesting, gender-focused program called Banking on Women, where we actually do implementations across financial institutions and creating, very interesting 360-degree kind of programs driving financial services for women. So I've been doing that for a while. And when the Financial Alliance for Women were looking at doing this research, I think someone recommended our name, and I, together with Mushir, who's also the co-author of this report, and he started Finstep Asia. So we applied as Finstep Asia for the RFP, and we won it. So that's how we got to be involved in the report.
And how many did you survey?
Yeah, let me actually share some of my screen as well, because that'll be easier, because there's a lot of data. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, how many did we survey? So we actually surveyed, I mean, this research we did it as both qualitative and quantitative research. And together we interviewed and surveyed about 168 participants, both fintechs as well as, VCs and other stakeholders in the entire ecosystem. And this is divided across the, globally divided. I mean, so you can see there's more than 43 countries which were covered in the research, and across different fintech sectors, right from credit and lending, digital banking, wealth tech, digital identity, payments, across, all different kinds of fintechs, and both B2B and B2C fintechs. So fairly representative, actually. I mean, we covered, fintechs across different countries and categories as part of this research.
And what were the main differences in the way women and men interact with financial services?
So, I mean, to be honest, this survey was not so much focused on what are the main ways in which, what are the differences in how men and women interact with financial services. But the Financial Alliance for Women has done a lot of fabulous research on this earlier. So I would definitely encourage everyone to go to their website. It's the financialallianceforwomen.org. There's, brilliant research. I mean, we call this demand side research, basically, right? That how do women actually interact with financial services? What do they want from financial services? And there's a lot of interesting stuff around, how women prefer like goal-based savings, and, how they want insurance as part of the entire financial proposition, how non-financial services are extremely important, which is things like financial education, financial management, all of that is extremely important. And how women as users are different from men as well, that they're more loyal users. They actually, even though they might take longer to adapt to financial services, but they actually refer more users, they use more products. So there's a whole lot of research on that side already. The focus of this research was actually to try and understand how are fintechs looking at, women as a sector overall, right? Like, are they actually creating some specific propositions for women, and are they looking at gender disaggregated data or not? That was a very, very important focus point of this research. And by gender disaggregated data, and it's interesting actually that, you would assume that it's fintech, so using tech, so hence, they should actually have access to all the data possible. But interestingly, not all the fintechs had access to gender disaggregated data. But the good news being that of the ones who did, the important metrics of usage ratio, for example, how are women using products as much as men are using financial services or not, because that's one of the big myths that's always there in financial service providers, that women actually don't use financial services products as much as men do. So this was an important point, that of the fintechs who are looking at gender disaggregated data, they found that 64% women actually had similar or higher usage ratios than men, right? So that's a very important point to focus on. Then coming down to even more important business metrics like, the cost of acquisition, because again, there's a lot of myths, because initially when we did our qualitative research and interviews, we heard from a lot of fintechs that, oh, it's actually more expensive to acquire women as users. But then again, looking at the actual data, the fintechs which are looking at their gender disaggregated data found that 95% of them found that women have actually similar or lower cost of acquisition as compared to, male users. And LTV, then lifetime value of users, again, fintech which are looking at gender disaggregated data, they found 86% of them found that LTV for women was actually higher compared to higher or similar compared to men, right? So you can imagine that when you put these things together, that it's a lower or similar cost of acquisition and a higher or similar lifetime value, you can look at how overall this makes perfect business sense to, to target women as customers, right? So for us, this was a very, very important, discovery in the overall research, that fintechs which are actually looking at gender disaggregated data can see a very clear business case, right? So the focus of this research was a lot more on trying to figure this out, that who's looking at gender disaggregated data, and if they're not, why aren't they? And if they are, what is it that they're finding out? So as part of this, it's also important to emphasize that not enough fintechs are looking at gender disaggregated data. And that's one of the reasons for a lot of these preconceived notions and these myths, which, keep propagating across financial services. That if you look at this whole funnel, right, you can literally see that while 71 to 78% fintechs actually know the gender of their users, but when it comes to calculating, looking at further data analysis, like looking at CAC, looking at LTV, looking at usage ratios, it keeps dropping off by gender. Like they look at it in an aggregate way, but they wouldn't be disaggregating it by gender. So that's again extremely important and a big focal point, that you can see clearly that the ones who are disaggregating it by gender in the previous slide can see a clear business case, right? And that's important. And that's what, is one of the biggest findings of this report, that there's a clear business case. And, it's a question of fintechs learning to focus on this sector and see the business case.
What I thought was really interesting in the report was findings around the customer value proposition. We've talked about, you just talked about CAC and lifetime value, but the customer value proposition, and then the need to integrate holistic, non-financial solutions if fintechs want to capture the women's market. Give me some good examples of these gender intelligent products and solutions.
Yeah. So again, a lot of this comes from some of the previous research that the Alliance has done, and they kind of classify it as 4 main categories. That women want a lot more financial education and financial management. They want, a lot more information around financial products as well. That because and again, when this research is done around women, they actually say it categorically that they consider themselves less informed around financial services, and hence they want more information around, products and services. And women actually do think that their networks are not really good in able to be, to be able to run their businesses better, or to be able to sort of, progress further in their career as well. So the ability to have better networks is also part of this overall non-financial services. And recognition, making sure that, that the spotlight can be shown on women who are actually doing well. There can be leaderboards for, recognizing, women who are performing better as part of overall networks. That's also really important. So that's just kind of classifying into 4 main categories. But to give you examples of fintechs who are doing some fabulous work, and as part of this research, we actually came across more than 30 fintechs which are actually started by women for women, right? And these are fintechs where these women, and primarily female founders, and because these female founders actually found issues that they had to, kind of deal with as part of their own lives, and hence they decided that, we need to start, something which focuses on creating, very customized and personalized financial services for women. So for example, there's a company called Basis in India. They're basically a personal financial management tool for women primarily, and like a wealth tech tool basically. And they've focused a lot on community building and making sure that, women can actually come and talk about money openly in their online and their offline communities both. And what they saw is that they do a lot of surveys basically asking women that, what do you need help with? And in their surveys, they found that a lot of women need help with sort of financial calculators, literally, that for different life moments, what are the kind of, how much is it that they should actually be saving. And if you think about it, like how much a woman should be saving versus how much a man should be saving is actually quite different. And the algorithms need to account for that because, to be honest, like the career, the gender pay gap is a reality, right? Women do end up earning lower to the dollar compared to men. Career breaks are a reality as well. It's mostly, very often women have to end up taking career breaks compared to men. So all of this then ends up accounting for how we need to do our, savings as well, right? And then what Basis did is that they actually created very, very focused financial calculators for each of these life goals that women wanted to save for, and they incorporated it in their mobile app. And that was really useful for, their entire community, because that's exactly what they wanted, that they wanted to be able to put in dollar terms that this is how much we need to save for different, life moments, right? So those are very simple examples of how fintechs are actually making sure that they're creating very holistic propositions and creating a community and creating networks, providing education, providing financial management as part of their overall proposition.
How have marketing strategies by the financial services sector developed to attract women customers?
So, I mean, again, over here, what we try to do is, I don't have a slide for that right now, but what we try, it's in the report. Because we had a lot of these fintechs which were focused on women only, right? Like fintech started by women and focused on women only. What we did is we tried to compare and contrast the different ways that they were marketing versus the different ways that other fintechs were marketing. Because that's what would help us understand that, what is it that's working better in targeting women. And what this highlighted is basically that word of mouth was extremely important, like making sure that, women actually do end up referring more women once they're happy with the product, right? So word of mouth was a very important marketing tool for all of these, women focused fintechs compared to the other fintechs. Then online communities and offline communities, again, very, very important sort of, and imagine like this is a marketing, this is a marketing tool basically, right? It's part of the overall proposition, but also a marketing tool, that creating communities, getting women involved and talking about finances and money. I mean, that's a very, very important marketing tool as well. I think also most importantly, just making sure that, the overall communication, it's simple, it talks to us as customers, and it's not all jargon, it's not just jargon. And also no pink marketing, right? Like that's also really important, that just, making sure that you come up with a pink credit card with some offers, that's not creating an effective proposition for women as well, and that's not effective marketing to women. So it was very clear from all of the previous research also that the alliance has done, that financial service providers need to steer clear of the pink marketing zone for sure. The communication needs to be a lot more authentic and effective. Like we should be able to see ourselves in their ads, right? I mean, if you think about it, how many financial service providers actually show women in their ads in the first place, right? I mean, that's literally a starting point as well. And then making sure that those ads are representative as well, right? Like if they're in Asia, it should show, Asian representation. If they're, in other parts of the world, it should show that representation. So I think, yeah, that's part of overall making sure that the communication is authentic and effective as well. But making sure everything is very, very data driven ultimately is what, ensures that, because like I said, otherwise there can be a lot of myths in the minds of financial service providers that women are not using our products, so why should we target women in the first place? But once you start looking at gender disaggregated data and you see that there's a clear business case, even if it might be a smaller percentage of your user base, but if it's a more profitable, user base, then that's what you need to be focusing on as well. And hence you'll start coming up with better strategies for focusing on women and marketing to women better.
What does the report say about identifying and correcting gender bias?
Yes, so that's a very big topic actually. Like, how do you actually identify bias? I think bias can come in many shapes and forms, and I'll just give a few examples. I mean, in fact, I spoke about a few of those examples already, right? The fact that, like, we try to give them different names, like profitability bias, assuming that women are not a very profitable segment. And this is just, it's anecdotal and it's hearsay, because obviously the fintechs who are looking at gender disaggregated data can clearly see that this is not true, right? So these are biases which have just sort of been perpetuated over the years and are, kind of being perpetuated further as well. Or for example, something simple like team composition bias as well, that if, we actually tried to ask in our research as well, that what's the percentage of women overall across the fintechs, and what's the percentage of women as employees in the product and tech roles, and, on their boards also. So while overall, it's the percentage of women as employees is okay, but as soon as it comes to women in tech and product roles, it drops drastically across different fintechs, and we put those statistics in the report as well. So what that means then directly is that, again, if women are not in the position where they're the ones who can actually help identify pain points for other women as well, as part of product decision making, the products will not end up getting designed for them as well, right? So there's multiple ways in which these biases can come across. And then when we ask fintechs about what has been the most effective way in addressing these biases, the good thing is that a lot of them have started thinking about it and have started putting processes in place to address it. And the examples that most of them came up with in terms of what are the most effective ways, setting up design thinking was one of the most effective ways. And design thinking, basically, it's something which goes across the organization, right? Starts with obviously product, like in the whole product development process, that making sure that, when you do user research, it's very human-centered design research, that you're going out and talking to your customers actually, because a lot of financial institutions honestly have never done that before, right? It's a very new thing to be able to kind of, go and talk to your user and understand what they actually need. So setting up this design thinking, which starts mostly in product and tech, but then it needs to, kind of go down to the entire organization as well. The other things are obviously, this is again quite new, sourcing gender balanced data. Because think about it, that if your previous data has always had more men than women, then obviously your algorithms will kind of get biased with that as well, right? So sometimes, companies are actually looking at getting access to gender balanced data and including that as part of their overall algorithms in order to make sure that there's no bias in their algorithms, but quite complex to do that, obviously. Creating a diverse and gender balanced team is of course very, very important, because like I said, I mean, the more women there are in tech and product roles, the more they can ensure that, it's that our requirements as a segment are taken care of as well. So yeah, those are some of the ways that fintechs have been looking at addressing the bias.
It was interesting in the report too how investors are influencing the fintech ecosystem as well, giving funding to businesses that can easily scale and perhaps inadvertently catering to male users. It's a big question, but how do we break that cycle?
Very difficult cycle to break. I think literally, like, research like this is a starting point, because what we found was very encouraging was that when we actually spoke to both founders and investors, it's almost a light bulb moment for them that that's actually true, that, women are such a big segment. Women are more and more in the workforce. They are more and more making financial decisions. It's actually, we're leaving money on the table if we're not looking at them, specifically as a segment. Because I mean, when we ask investors, do you think there's actually difference in the way, women want financial services versus men want financial services? Primarily, most of them said no. The fintechs that we've invested in have a gender neutral product, right? While not realizing that this gender neutrality has gender bias baked into it, unless you've taken specific steps from the very beginning to understand requirements of both, when men and women, and make sure that it's accounted for in your product. If not, then it's not really gender neutral, right? So I think, but the encouraging thing was that even though, they said this, but the fact that once we spoke with them, it was literally that, they felt that, okay, yes, that's interesting. We're going to try and make sure that we insist with our fintechs also to look at gender disaggregated data and to make sure that, they can actually focus more on women as a segment as well. So that we thought was really encouraging. So I think the first thing is literally making sure that more of these conversations are being had, and like having platforms like Next Chapter Raise is brilliant as well, right? I mean, you guys are amplifying the voice of female founders, you're amplifying research like this as well. So I think that's also equally important. In terms of the things that the investors themselves said, that what will help them focus more on women as a segment. And I think a lot of times this gets confused with focusing on female founders, right? But these are two different things. I mean, the onus of women as a segment in financial services shouldn't just be on female founders, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a profitable segment, like the data shows. So ideally, every founder, whether male or female, should be focused on it. So we don't want to confuse it with focusing on female founders only, but it does happen that, in all the female focused fintechs that we looked at, they were all primarily female founded. So of course, focus on female founders will definitely help, the overall cause as well. But what the investors specifically identified was that making sure that we can show them more research, which shows, that, yeah, women do have different requirements from financial services, and they are a profitable segment. that would really help them in creating an overall thesis around, the segment, right? So how this whole space works is that investors have a thesis, they start putting dollars, other investors start developing the same thesis and start following as well, and then fintechs kind of, or startups rather in general, start focusing on that segment also, right? So making sure we can actually give the right tools and the right data to investors also to have a thesis around the market would be very important, and we're hoping that this research gives at least one of those inputs into creating that thesis.
It's interesting when you talk about, the female opportunity or the female consumer opportunity, and femtech is estimated to be a $50 billion industry by 2025. It's one of the reasons that we're concentrating on it in our upcoming female funding fair on Thursday. It's such a big opportunity. This isn't a charity case, is it?
Exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah. And how important is government regulation in democratizing access and use of financial services as well?
Definitely, governments have, and regulators have a very important role to play again, because to be honest, I mean, if you look at things like, and we've highlighted some of this in the report, and it wasn't a focus of our research as such, but we've just kind of highlighted some of these important initiatives that government and regulators can take. One is just, if they can kind of insist and propagate this in the market to look at gender disaggregated data. I think that's one very, very important thing, that if more and more people start realizing that yes, gender is an important variable and we need to be disaggregating our data by that, it'll help them understand women as a segment better, right? So I think one is just that if regulators and government can actually, they can't mandate it, I guess, but at least if they can start talking about it more, and if they can start giving the feedback that in the market that we should be doing more of this, right? The other is are important initiatives. For example, in developing markets, a lot of times you'll see that KYC is very difficult for women as users, because not all women have the same kind of documents which are required by financial institutions for KYC, for opening accounts and all. So it's important to maybe have some kind of tiered KYC, that open the account, start using the financial services product, and maybe later on some other documentation can be provided, because a lot of times women actually don't have the same documents available as male users, right? So that excludes them immediately if there's no tiered KYC and all available. So it has to be government and regulators which sort of look at that issue as well. The other is just like discrimination can be caused by policies like you have to have a male signatory to open an account, right? That still happens in places like Hong Kong, right? It's shocking, but it still happens, right? So as a female, why do I need a male signatory to open an account, right? Yeah. So these are the kind of simple things which we don't think about too much, but they need to be addressed, right? Because it keeps excluding women from using financial services more effectively. Then other things like across the world, government to person payments have been known to bring more and more women into financial services as well, by opening simple accounts and all for them, especially the below poverty line segment. So that's again an important point, that government to person payments, etc., can be, we can make sure that more and more of that goes to women as well. So those are some of the simple things. But I think, yeah, most importantly, just talking about the idea of disaggregating data by gender is extremely important, and having tiered KYC, those would be, a couple of very important points.
We've covered a lot of the report today, which is fantastic. What are the overall conclusions, overarching conclusions?
Overarching conclusions. So I think, yeah, we love this graphic. It kind of puts together everything really nicely, that every player in the ecosystem, right from fintechs to VCs to policymakers and regulators and government, as we spoke about, and financial institutions, needs to come together to make sure that there can be gender intelligent, the whole ecosystem can be gender intelligent, right? And what that means is, for fintechs, it's the whole product roadmap needs to be gender intelligent, and their marketing needs to be gender intelligent, right? And what that means is making sure that they're looking at, when they look at the total addressable market, that's, they're looking at it in a gender disaggregated way. They're doing proper market research about women as customers. They're actually capturing gender during onboarding. Like if you saw the earlier data, about 71 to 78% fintechs had gender as a variable captured in their database, but which means that at least 20 to 25% of them weren't even capturing the gender of their users, right? So that's really important. And then once they've captured it, making sure that they're actually disaggregating their data by gender, that's super important. Building their products in a more gender intelligent way. So for example, the example I gave about bases, that if we are calculating, we are actually looking at personal financial management, making sure that things which are specific to women as a segment are accounted for in those algorithms, right? Then in terms of the marketing, all the non-financial services that we spoke about, very important for fintechs, and content and imagery, making sure that that's focused on women customers, and the channels that I use, which is online and offline community building events and referrals, very important for fintechs overall. So that's for fintechs as part of the overall ecosystem. For VCs, of course, like we mentioned, I mean, developing a thesis around gender and making sure that they can, there's actually some gender lens investing and insisting with their fintechs to look at gender disaggregated data. For policymakers, like we discussed, having some publishing gender disaggregated data, digital identity and tiered KYC, all of that. And for, the other thing is that financial institutions, because that's primarily been the focus for the Financial Alliance for Women. They've primarily worked with financial institutions across all these years. The idea is that fintechs can actually work very closely with financial institutions also, because, well, what a lot of fintechs don't know is that many financial institutions now have dedicated women's market teams, right? So for example, all the banks which work with the Financial Alliance for Women, which is 60 plus banks, most of them actually have a dedicated women's market team, and they actually create, specific products and services for the women's market. They specifically look at, marketing better to the women's market. So there's a lot of scope in actually fintechs working closely with these kinds of financial institutions to create better products for the women's market as well. Then interestingly, there are also some startups which are very focused on women as a segment, and I can quickly show you a few of those. Like there's Shiro's in India, which is more than 21 million registered women users on their platform. It started more as a networking platform, but now they're literally like creating job opportunities for women. They're upskilling women, doing loads of things around the women's economy. Meesho, for example, again in India, it has 2 million women resellers. Like they actually they have sellers on their platform who can supply products to women as resellers, and then women can actually become business women and sell it in their entire, in their networks as well, right? So there's a lot of these specific kind of examples of companies coming up. And again, the thing is that these are companies which are creating economic opportunities for women. So the minute there are economic opportunities for women, then you can start layering financial services over there as well, right? That gives an opportunity for fintechs to work with these kinds of companies as well, to create focused financial services propositions for women. So that's the other example of, how we can actually come together as an overall ecosystem to create better gender intelligent products.
What that goes to show is that if you make small steps or inroads in one particular part of the ecosystem, the rest of the ecosystem can benefit. And I think if there is a positive, that is certainly one of them. Yosha Gupta, thank you so much for your time. It's a fascinating report. We're going to link to it for our members and the wider community. And we look forward to seeing you as well on Thursday at the Female Funding Fair. Next Chapter Raises virtual conference this year. We'll be talking about femtech and the female consumer opportunity and how that plays out across Asia Pacific. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Yosha, see you soon.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
See you.